My name is Ian Binnie. I'm Education Coordinator and a Trustee of the Gallipoli Association. But this is very much a double act. I have Graham Walker, a former soldier, and lives quite close to you in Salford. I'm coming to you from sunny Birmingham. So what's going to follow is an overview of the Gallipoli campaign, a summary of the contribution of soldiers from Lancashire and Greater Manchester, and then Graham is going to talk about one particular individual, Billy Unsworth. We'll have questions, and then if you can stand it, we'll have a song at the end. So let me just get the pointer working. There we go. So firstly, where is Gallipoli? Well, here it is down here, the Gallipoli Peninsula in present-day Turkey. And that's a closer map of it, or a larger map of it. The Gallipoli Peninsula there, and the Dardanelles there. The Turkish capital, Constantinople, the Black Sea here, Aegean there. The main events of the Gallipoli campaign started with some naval attacks. I'll come back to that in a moment. It was only meant to be a naval campaign. Then there were landings at Helles and ANZAC, attempted breakouts from those landings, some battles which I'll refer to called Gully Ravine and Krithia, then the Silver landings and diversionary attacks, August offensive on 21st of August, then it just degenerated into a very unpleasant trench deadlock, and then evacuation, because the Allies, including the British, lost. It was a defeat. The Turks won. There's no way around that. So why did it happen? It was said, as I said before, initially a naval attack, but they'd already developed a group of Easterners, of which Winston Churchill was one of those, who thought the war was going badly already on the Western Front, and it could be more decisive to act in the East. And they aimed to knock out the sick man of Europe, Turkey, quickly. And that phrase, sick man of Europe, indicates the low opinion that the Allies had of Turkey. And that's why they thought that Turkey could be knocked out by just a naval attack, by ships sailing up the Dardanelles into the Sea of Marmara, bombarding Constantinople and knocking them out. And that was the strategy. It was never intended as a land campaign. And it would also have opened an easier supply route to Russia as well, across the Black Sea, as I showed you on the map. Could it ever have succeeded? With the resources it had, no. And I'll give some pointers to that conclusion a little bit later on. But with the resources that were allocated to it, despite the enormous mission creep, it could never have succeeded because of the manpower and the weaponry that was provided. So the first Turkish victory was 18th of March, and that's when they celebrate it in this country. And we celebrate Gallipoli Day. In Australia, they celebrate ANZAC Day on the 25th of April. The Turks celebrate it on the 18th of March. There were two large-scale attacks. The last of the two was on the 18th of March. Pretty old, pre-deadlock battleships. They couldn't sweep the mines in front of them because of the Turkish shore guns, and a number of French and British, because there was a big French involvement. French and British ships were sunk or damaged, as I've said there. So the decision was made to land the MEF, the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, under a Scotsman, an experienced Scottish general, had a good career up to that point, Sir Ian Hamilton. And it was going to be a small force to nullify the guns, allow the mines to be cleared, and these ships were going on to Constantinople. The Turks had plenty of time to prepare. They knew they were coming. It was hardly a surprise attack. And the Allies, as I said, consistently underestimated the Turks. Gallipoli, the Gallipoli area is beautiful. If you ever visit there, lots of monuments, lots of statues. This is a bit of fake news. This Turk is supposed to have carried this shell to a gun and sank a British battleship by firing that shell. But in fact, the British battleship concerned was sunk by mines. But it's a great story. And there's Surrey and Hamilton, second one in from the right. So people say to me, with the when I mention that I do stuff for the Gallipoli Association, they say, oh, that's where the Australians were. And it's quite right to remember the Australians and the New Zealanders. And for the both nations, it was a very significant moment. It was the first time their troops were used outside of their countries in independent commands. But the majority of Allied troops are British and Irish, with a strong contingent from the Empire, including India and Newfoundland, which, if you ever speak to anybody from Newfoundland, they will tell you it wasn't in Canada at that time. It was a separate part of the Empire. French, we tend to forget the large French contingent. They do as well. They very rarely commemorate or remember Gallipoli. And the initial idea was to send just one regular division, the 29th Division, and the Royal Naval Division to begin with, and that's all. But we had this mission creep, a number of territorial divisions were sent, and a number of Kitchener divisions of volunteers, and many of those from the northwest, as we'll see. And 500,000 troops eventually served in the campaign. So initially, the landings around these beaches at the tip of the Hellas Peninsula. There's Gully Ravine. Achibaba there was the objective on the first day. The Australians landed up here in ANZAC, and there was a third front opened in August. These were in April, in August in Suvla Bay. So the 29th Division and the Royal Naval Division provided the infantry. There were light resistance on 3 of the beaches, but opportunities were lost. Y Beach, there was no resistance. They could have reached Krithia, but eventually they withdrew under a very light Turkish counterattack. And if there was ever a reality to this very dubious quote of lions led by donkeys, it was in the Gallipoli campaign, because the generalship was extremely poor and lots of opportunities were lost. Great bravery on V and W Beach, very heavy casualties at V Beach when the troops landed from the River Clyde, and likewise at W Beach, where the Lancashire Fusiliers won 6 VCs before breakfast, and I'll come back to that. And there's a picture of the River Clyde. A good idea to land an old transport ship on the beach, but if you look at this photograph here, you see what happened. This is a real photograph. You see dead and dying Allied soldiers here, mainly Irishmen, and Hampshires from the Hampshire Regiment. Here you see them sheltering, and then these little group dark patches here are soldiers sheltering from the Turkish fire. Enormous casualties, and that's a real picture taken from the River Clyde itself. The ANZAC landings went better, but many of the troops were landed far too north in incredibly difficult terrain, and I'll talk about the terrain in a moment. The troops became mixed up. This is a common feature in Gallipoli, mixed up, and took many hours before moving on to their objectives. And a lot of good Turkish officers, senior officers, one was Mustafa Kemal, became Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern-day Turkey, died of cirrhosis of the liver, which is unusual for a Muslim, but he liked his brandy. And he, very good general, organised fierce resistance and almost drove the Australians into the sea. And because they considered evacuation, but they hung on. And then stalemate developed. The Turks quickly reinforced Hellas. There were very costly battles, trying to break through the trenches at places called Krithia and Gully Ravine. The Allies never had enough artillery and they never had enough shells. They really had to ration the shells. The Anzacs were hemmed into a 1.5 mile beachhead, dominated by the high ground. The Allies always seemed to have to attack uphill. Coordinated attacks are very difficult, but the Turks also lost enormous amount of men in ill-coordinated, badly planned battles as well, offences as well. But this was a similar picture, similar to that on the Western Front. This is in the Battle of Krithia, of soldiers gunned down as they cross no man's land to attack the trenches. So Hamilton, to his credit, and he doesn't come out with much credit, tried a new landing further north in the rear of the Turks. I'll show you the map again as well. And that caught the Turks completely by surprise. And the landings on the 6th of August were virtually unopposed. There were hardly any Turks in the area. But once again, poor leadership meant opportunities were lost. It was the 9th Corps. It was led by a man called Stopford, who had come from the post of being in charge of the Tower of London for many years. Many of these generals were brought out of retirement. Many of them had wounds or injuries. Stopford himself had a serious back injury that affected his performance. And opportunities were lost. So once again, this reoccurring theme of the Allies launching costly and unsuccessful attacks uphill onto the high ground. And there's a picture of the Suvla landings, the puffs of smoke. The splashes are generally Allied artillery. There was hardly any Turkish resistance. And the Allies were learning. They sent the troops ashore in specially constructed landing craft with some armour. And that perhaps explains why the casualties were so light. And there we have Suvla Bay. I say Krithia, there's a stalemate there, a stalemate with the Australians hemmed in there, and this landing in Suvla Bay. And we'll talk about some of the battles there when we look at the northwestern involvement in a bit more detail. Now, this really sums it up. If ever this is a photograph of lost opportunities, these are supposed to be British troops, but they're supposed to be pressing on quickly ashore. You see the ships, they've come from here. That's not a picture of any urgency. These were very brave, capable, inexperienced, but capable soldiers, very, very badly led, and allowed the Turks to rush reinforcements in and hold the high ground. So Hamilton also launched a number of supporting attacks, large-scale offensives from Anzac and Helles to coincide with these Suvla landings. There was some success at Gully Ravine, I'll mention that in a moment, and at Krithia Vineyard. And also the Australians, when they attacked, it was the attack that features in the film Gallipoli, a very accurate film, but very anti-English. Peter Weir's film, I think in the 1980s, early 1980s, the attack at the neck, very realistically portrayed, very, very heavy casualties. So it took a little bit of tension away from Suvla, but nobody was pressing on with great urgency, while a lot of Australians and British troops were becoming casualties. That's a picture not of the neck, but a Battle of Lone Pine, when the Turks had to be prized out of trenches covered with wooden logs. But one of the few successes in these attacks to take away attention from Suvla. So the final offensive, there was a cull of senior officers by Hamilton. He blamed a lot of them for his own failure. There was one last major offensive on the Suvla front on 21st of August. I'll come back to that in a moment because some northwestern soldiers were involved. It was a futile badly coordinated attack, and Hamilton was replaced soon after by Monroe, and his military career ended, apart from years trying to say that he would have been successful if only there were more resources. And there was a commission into the Dardanelles. He spent a long time trying to influence the decision of that commission. Had he spent more time ashore in Gallipoli, he never set foot in Gallipoli, he might have fared better as a commander. And then a very unpleasant deadlock as it moved into winter. Soldiers were dying from disease. They were suffering terribly in the winter from frostbite, and some even died from exposure in the mountainous areas. And that's what we didn't have enough of. That could almost be an action picture. There's the 4 shells that they were restricted to that day, or 5 with one in a barrel. They were restricted to that day. Very, very short of guns and short of artillery, short of shells. And that's the sort of trench scenes, very, very common on all fronts. I often joke that that's me as education coordinator with my hat on the rifle, where the rest of the trustees are dozing off in the trench, but they aren't like that really. They're very, very supportive and very active, all of them. So the beginning of the end, Allied politicians tired of the campaign, and at the end of September, some divisions were sent to another sideshow, another unsuccessful sideshow, often called one of the largest prison camps in the history of war, at Salonika. Casualties continued back in Gallipoli to mount from sniping, trench raids and limited offensives, and disease, particularly dysentery. And then the evacuation, and some people in the Gallipoli Association are very keen to point out that it was a very successful evacuation. There were no casualties at all, but we were leaving. Suvla and ANZAC evacuated in December, Hellas in January. Masses of equipment was left behind. What the cost of it, I don't know. And hundreds of horses and mules were slaughtered as well. So in the end, the campaign was a complete failure. Allied casualties, approximately 302,000, 57,000 those were French, a third due to sickness, dysentery, and the Turks lost approximately 250,000. So when you think it was only meant to involve 2 divisions, quickly dealing with some shore guns, that's really quite a good example of mission creep. And the debate still going on. Some believe that if even Turkey had been knocked out of the war, Germany would continue to fight. Others say that opening a supply route to Russia would have led to even more scarce resources being wasted on that country, particularly when they had the revolution. And some say that Turkey could possibly pose the threat to Egypt if they're not fighting in for their own territory in the peninsula. I doubt it. The Turks weren't in a position to launch a full-scale attack on Egypt. Some lessons were learned that were used in World War II, but you have to really stretch that a bit to make the campaign worth anything. So on to the Northerners. So first of all, looking at the regulars. A number of divisions I'm going to talk about. Firstly, the 29th Division, regular division, number of overseas battalions brought in, gathered in the Midlands, and they went off to take part in the landings. The 1st Battalion, Lancashire Fusiliers, suffered terribly. They included, over the course of the campaign, suffered over 1,800 casualties, and that included 600 of the 1,000 men who came ashore on W Beach. 6 VCs were awarded, wrongly called the 6 VCs before breakfast, because British soldiers never go into battle without breakfast. Only one, and this is not to decry the enormous bravery and the huge contribution in the Northwest, only one of those VC winners was from Lancashire. And then the division remained in Gallipoli until the evacuation, fighting at both Helles and Suvla. And some historians call them the Old Guard. They were obviously the regulars were replaced by volunteers, but they were there for the whole campaign. And there's a very famous picture, the 6 VCs before breakfast of the Lancashire Fusiliers coming ashore. And the Gallipoli Association very keen to remember the 29th Division, and there's the monument where near where they were inspected by the King before they went off to Gallipoli. It's in Streatham-upon-Dunsmore, unfortunately one of the busiest roads in the West Midlands. Very difficult to do any commemoration there without risk of life and limb. But you then had other divisions, the 11th Northern Division. They were volunteers, one of the 6 new divisions of Kitchener's army, and sailed for the Mediterranean in June, July 1915. Now, you need really to think of the dates of that. If the war broke out in August and these volunteers were supposedly trained and ready in June, July 1915 for action, it wasn't a long time. Not a long time at all. Landed at Suvla on the 7th of August, and sorry to mention the Yorkshires in a talk on the Northwest, but the 6 Yorkshires from that division were the first Kitchener unit to be involved anywhere in the world in an offensive operation capturing Lalababa Hill. And it fought in all this division, the 11th Northern Division rather, fought in all the difficult battles in August, suffering very high casualties, and evacuated in December 1915. And the 34th Brigade were made up there of a lot of northwestern regiments with a little bit of Yorkshire. The other brigades weren't northwestern, they were from different parts of the north. And just the 34th Brigade at Suvla, just an example, in 21st of August, this offensive, which Peter Hart, great historian, says was completely superfluous. They didn't need to attack. They attacked a place called Hetman Char across flat fields. The orders, often badly planned, coordinated attacks. The orders didn't arrive until the morning of the attack, and they attacked in the afternoon. Ineffective bombardment. Some of the 9th Lancashires managed to get into the Turkish trenches. They hung on until the morning in order to withdraw back to Chocolate Hill. So a depressing repetition of what happened, and very high casualties amongst officers and NCOs. And there's Suvla, and Hetman Chair was here. Scimitar Hill was an objective, but then was never seized by the Allied forces. And there's a picture of one of the Manchester regiments coming into Suvla. The 42nd East Lancashire Division were entirely territorials. Kitchener had a very mixed view on territorials, but ended up agreeing that they could go to Gallipoli, and they were mobilized for full-time service on the 5th of August and landed in June. They traveled via Egypt. The whole division wasn't there until June. The 125th Brigade managed to get there first and took part in the 2nd Battle of Krithia, and then the entire division was involved in the 3rd Battle of Krithia, and then the Battle of Krithia Vineyard in August. Evacuated in 1916, 395 officers, incredible amount of officers, because that includes replacements, and 8,152 other ranks were killed, wounded, or missing. And there's the division, almost entirely northwestern troops there, including a lot from Manchester. And just to focus on the Battle of Krithia Krithia Vineyard rather, this is to support the Suvla landings, last major offensive on the Helles front. The 29th Division, remember them, attacked on the left 125th and 127th Brigade attacked on the right a day later. Very heavy casualties attacking the Turkish trenches. Some men got into the enemy trenches but were thrown out by Turkish counterattacks. And some of 125 Brigade hung on in a small section of trenches until the 13th of August, when the Turks gave up. Lieutenant Eric Duckworth, the man of the Gallipoli oak fame, his father went over and planted an oak, which is still there. He was killed in that battle. And Captain William Forthshaw of the 9th Manchester awarded the cigarette VC for 2 days. 2 days he was throwing jam tin grenades with a cigarette in his mouth, keeping the Turks at bay, and is known as the cigarette VC. I suppose if you've got jam tin grenades lit by a fuse, you need a cigarette. And there's a picture of the Manchesters actually attacking, a real picture across the no man's land. And there we have that's the front line, and Krithia Vineyard was around there. So the 29th were attacking here and the 11th Division here. And another 2 VCs in from Northwesterners or Northwestern regiments. There's Forshaw himself. It's not 2 VCs. Forshaw himself, the cigarette VC, and then we also had a VC awarded to Victor Smith of the East Lancashire Regiment, who died sadly at Hellis. Look at the date though, 23rd of December. Awarded the VC very late on in the campaign, as they already decided to evacuate. And finally, the 13th Western Division, which not only was a shortage of artillery, they never had any. Their artillery was left behind. It was viewed there wasn't enough room. And the 38th Brigade, it was mainly a Western Division. The 38th Brigade included those Northwestern battalions, and they were separated from the rest of the division. Never a good idea, caused a lot of confusion anyway, to fight on the Anzac front. And it landed overnight on the 6th and 7th of August, and was involved in a number of battles: Surrey Bar, the Battle of Russell's Top, the Battle of Hill 60, all very badly coordinated, confused defensives, very heavy casualties again amongst officers and NCOs, and the division was then transferred to Suvla and evacuated in January 1916. And Hamilton had a nice turn of phrase, called them, they were like a sucked orange in the end. And that's Sarry Bear. That's imagine attacking up there. There's the Manchester Regiment, one of the Manchester regiments going up the gully there to attack them, and that's what it is looking down. So no wonder they found it difficult to shift the Turks from these high points. And this is they were attacking along here. This mainly Australians, but the decision was made to land use part of the 13th Western Division in the attacks here. And there is a whole talk on the 13th Western Division by Major Paul Knight. When I said it says Ian Binnie there, I really just pressed the buttons and got him going. And that's on our website. You can watch a video of that talk on our website. And a very famous northerner, but he was born in Putney, is Clement Atlee. He was a lieutenant in the 6th Battalion South Lancashire Regiment. I presume everybody knows Clement Atlee, very successful Labour Prime Minister. Remember those. Attlee's older brother was Tom. He was a conscientious objector, and the fact that Atlee joined the army put a wedge between them. He developed dysentery, put on a ship bound for England, but he woke up in Malta and he got off the ship and stayed there. He missed that Battle of Surrey Bear I've just mentioned, in which many of his battalion was killed. He was the last man to be evacuated from Suvla Bay, the last being General Stanley Maude. I said it was Munro who took over. It wasn't, it was Maude. Munro was an Australian, apologies for that. And Atlee went on to serve in Mesopotamia, finishing the war as a major. And there's a picture of him there with rather more hair than he had during the Second World War. Of course, in the northwest. I'm going to hand over to Graham in a moment. The northwest Gallipoli is remembered. There's the memorial in Bury, the Gallipoli Memorial in Bury, and no, sorry, Rochdale, and there's the Lancashire Fusiliers, although quite how the regiment, what the regiment is called at the moment, I'm not quite sure, but there's ex-Fusiliers remembering the Lancashire Fusiliers who died in Gallipoli. Two very good books, Gallipoli by Peter Hart, very readable, and one with a lot of illustrations, Richard van Emden, Stephen Chambers. If you want to find out anything about a particular unit, Stephen Chambers' book on Krithia and Suvla are fantastic. But with Richard van Emden, he produced this book with lots of illustrations as well on Gallipoli, so well worth looking at. And if you're interested in finding out more about Gallipoli, you could join the Gallipoli Association. You could start a project in Manchester with help and funding from the GA. I've got a little bit of funding which I can help community groups like that one there, although there was more than the 6. That was the an ANZAC Day celebration, Gallipoli Day celebration, when you had to socially distance, and there were limits that were followed by this group, but of course not by members of Parliament or members of a particular party. And you could visit Gallipoli as well, which is a fantastic place to visit. The Gallipoli Association organise regular tours, but is very, the Turks are very, very welcoming and very pleasant place to stay. Being a little bit political, those areas of Turkey are very cosmopolitan and very anti-Erdogan, so very welcoming to Westerners there. Okay, so that's it from me. Let me just find stop share, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, that is Graham Walker. Okay, thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any questions for you, Ian? I noticed there was questions popping up there.
Yes,
there's several questions. We tend to like to do them at the end, unless Rob, do you want to?
No, I think there's a whole pile of questions with some quite interesting common themes, so perhaps we'll bundle them up and tackle them at the end.
Right. Okay.
Rather than interrupting you guys' flow.
Well, hopefully that common theme isn't rubbish. So
not at all. No.
It's all good stuff.
Good, because I'd hand over to Graham if it wasn't. Yeah.
Thanks, Ian.
Graham.
Yeah. Good evening, and again a lovely talk from Ian. I've kind of heard it once or twice, I think, while we've been doing stuff. Always very interesting and a very good overview in the short time that Ian had to cover Gallipoli, because of course it's a huge subject with hundreds of thousands of men being taken there during the 12 months or so. I'd just like to share my screen, and I'm going to talk about one individual rather than an overview, but there was a few things that Ian mentioned in his talk that do overlap with the SS River Clyde and Suvla Bay and Scimitar Hill. They do overlap. So I'll try and share my screen. So you can probably see him in the little box, but have you all got the...
Yeah, looks good to me. That's great.
Report, yeah, okay. I'll use my storyboard that I put together last year, and I wrote a song called The Ballad of Billy Unsworth, which is a folk song, and it's based on a soldier from Ordsall in Salford, right next to the Manchester Ship Canal. It was actually my good friend's grandfather who had written around about 100 letters home. And when I was talking to him before I knew anything really about Gallipoli, he asked me how I was doing with with the music. I like playing a little folk music and bits and pieces. And I said I was looking for something to write about. And he said he's just inherited around 100 letters from his grandfather, which he's going through. So we went through them, and they are fascinating. And I have access to them now because, unfortunately, my friend passed away before Christmas. We were doing the research together and we're writing the book, but fortunately he will not be able to see the finished product. So hopefully I can get that done in the next 12 months. A labour of love, really. So who's Billy Unsworth? There's Billy with his corporal stripes on. William Franklin Unsworth. He was christened. He was born in Sunnyside Street in Ordsall. A set of several hundred back-to-back, 2 up, 2 down terraces that run alongside the Manchester Ship Canal, and of course developed as the canal did. He was born in 1881. We called him Billy, poetic license, I guess. When his brothers wrote home, they called him Willie, and of course he was known as William, so poetic license. And for the song, we called him Billy Unsworth. His mum and dad, they were born in Salford. His father was Robert Unsworth and his mother Elizabeth. They were born a year apart, the mid-1800s, 1854, 1855. Billy born in 1881, to give you an idea of where they were. Billy's father, Robert, unfortunately died at a young age. He was 46 in 1899. And his mother, Billy's mother, actually met a chap called Joseph Davis and remarried rather quickly. And Billy didn't like this, so he went up to Bury and joined the Lancashire Fusiliers. What you see in front of you is a family picture of the time with Bella and some of the children. Bella, his wife, who he married having come back from the Boer War. It shows Margaret Roberts with Bella and her sisters. So the young girl, one of the young girls is Bella, and that's Bella's mother. So we're looking at Billy's wife as a young girl in a photograph. Billy and Bella were married on the 2nd of January 1904 at St Bartholomew's Church, which is no longer there. The memorial that was inside St Bartholomew's Church is now in St Clement's, and it bears Billy Unsworth's name on it, actually. And once I found that memorial and I went to the church and I saw the name W. Unsworth, alphabetically it's written, and underneath Billy Unsworth was the name G. Walker. So that really scared me to go to a church, see a chap I'm researching, and underneath the name of the lad I'm researching is my namesake, G. Walker. So that kind of kept me indoors for about 4 days afterwards. I wouldn't go anywhere. The Sunnyside Street is where he was born, and that's a typical set of terraced housing for the time, and that is an actual picture of Sunnyside Street in Ordsall. And Billy had several brothers, and because of time constraints, I won't go into those, but he had several brothers, and all of them were involved in the First World War. Charles, he was born 5 years after Billy, and he was in the Royal Marines, Light Infantry, served aboard HMS Lion, for those who have got a naval interest, HMS Lion. And Henry Unsworth, now he's probably the most interesting one of the brothers, really, because he was a general labourer, but he was born, he joined the Royal Munster Rifles because the Irish were recruiting around the same time as the British were recruiting, of course, and they were trying to fill regiments and battalions. So he joined the Royal Munster Rifles, and he changed his name to Harry Bowker. Now, I'm still researching Henry, and if we go back to Ian's talk, where he talked about the SS River Clyde landing on V Beach, and you saw the brilliant picture from probably the bridge area of the SS River Clyde, looking down at the troops at the front. Henry Unsworth, or Harry Bowker, was on that ship. He was on the SS River Clyde, and he was wounded as he went ashore. He survived Gallipoli, went to France, and he got the military medal. And when he left the army, he joined the military provost, and he became a staff sergeant, Henry Unsworth. To receive his military medal, he actually reverted his name back to Henry Unsworth to receive the medal. So there was some politics in it at the time. And we believe Henry went undercover in Northern Ireland at the time of the Easter Rising, just after the Easter Rising. So some skullduggery there and early undercover stuff. We probably know it as the SAS or a certain intelligence battalion these days. Robert, he lived in West Dixon Street, where Billy ended up as well. They're quite a large family. They all lived within a few hundred meters of each other. He was with a railway troop because he worked as a plate layer with a railway company, so kept in the same trade. And he was awarded the military medal, and he ended up a staff sergeant also, surviving the war. John Unsworth, he lived on Water Street, and if you know the boundary between Manchester and Salford as you're coming along the Mancunian Way, that's Water Street, where the abattoir was, and there was houses along there, and that's where Billy's mum lived for a short while, and so did John Unsworth, his brother. Unfortunately, another brother, John, was killed at Gully Ravine, and there's a picture at the end of my slides that shows me sat in a well in Gully Ravine. So it's possible that John Unsworth may have walked past that well at some point during the campaign. James, Royal Navy, he survived the war. He was on the HMS Erin, and he wrote several letters to Billy's wife. Of course, they were all close, and they were trying to find out what's happened to Billy. And in one of his letters, which I have this actual letter, he's saying, "Dear sister and children, I write to you a few lines, hoping they reach you in the best of health, as this leaves me at present." It's kind of how they talked and how they wrote at that time. Quite eloquent, really, for the time. Over 100 years ago, they were writing better than probably the children do today. He says, "I'm very sorry to hear that you got news officially that our Willie had got killed." And he goes in to say, "But cheer up and try to keep your pecker up." So that some of the language that they used then, and a stiff upper lip, it was amazing. And of course, they were God-fearing people and saying, "God is good, and if there is anything that I can do for you, I'll only be too pleased. So do not be afraid to ask." And enclosed in the letter, you'll find 2 shillings. I want you to give the children 6pence each. And of course, at the time, when they were sending money home, a lot of it's being stolen. Unbelievable for the time of what was happening at the time. Really unbelievable that money was taken out when they knew it was going to the families. His brother Albert was in India with the Manchester Regiment before Gallipoli, and he was with the 34th Brigade, as Ian explained earlier. And of course, Billy's battalion, the 9th Battalion, the Lancashire Fusiliers, were also the 34th Brigade. So they were there together. But as far as I'm aware, never bumped into each other. So you got 4 brothers there who didn't bump into each other at all that we know of. Albert was wounded 3 times, received a gunshot wound to the head, and he was evacuated. And he wrote home. In fact, Bella wrote to Albert asking if he knew about what happened to Billy, and he said, and Bella has said, "I've wrote to Preston," which was the HQ at the time, the regimental headquarters, Wrote to Preston 3 times, to the War Office as well, but they can't tell me anything about him. It's awful to be left here in suspense like this. So in a nutshell, Billy went to the Boer War. He survived. He was there around 18 months and came back. He married Bella and started his family, and he had 3 children. He worked as a brass turner at Glover's in Trafford Park. And if you know Trafford Park, then the building is, some of it is still there next to the Manchester United ground on the main, is it Trafford Park Road there that goes right through the middle. So some of that's still there. And that company actually made the conduits for the pipeline under the ocean in World War I, if you remember that. And the pipeline under the ocean that they took down to Africa was also destroyed by British forces as well, because if they felt if we can use it for communications, so can the Germans. So they destroyed it and then rebuilt it. South African campaign. Now there's young Billy, and after his death, Billy couldn't come to terms with it. He joined the 5th Battalion, the Lancashire Fusiliers, and he went down to South Africa. His local pub, there it is. It's not there anymore. It's at the top of Sunnyside Street and a junction of Woden Street. And if you know the Bricklayers Arms in Ordsall, it's just adjacent to that. If you cross the road, 1 street up, turn right, so you're going across the river. That's where it stood. And it was known as Nicky Burke's after the landlord. And the story goes that Billy came home from work one night, probably a Friday, and he walked in the pub and they were all looking at him. And Billy said, "What's up?" And his mate said, "You're joining the army." He said, "Why am I joining the army?" He said, "Well, we've put a few coppers on the table and it amounts to a shilling. And we've agreed that the next man through that front door is joining the army. And that's you, my lad. The shilling's yours." If you get to hear the song later, I think Ian may have it to add on, should you have time. But it is an 8-minute folk song, should you have time. If there isn't, I can show you the link where you can have a listen. But Billy went home to his wife and his children that day. And he told Bella that he was joining up, and she wasn't very happy because he was the breadwinner. He could have stayed at home being a brass turner, but he joined back up and was given his corporal stripes and became a training NCO. He moved out. How am I doing for time, by the way?
I think you're doing fine.
You're pretty
okay,
good.
Just give me a nod. Give me the 60-second warning, and I'll tidy up.
You're doing grand.
Thank you. Okay, now the first place Billy went to in the training with his recruits was Grantham. It was a huge place, and of course it became the machine gun corps training centre round about the time that Billy was there and just leaving. It was a huge area that was of land that was given for use by the local manor there. The manor house is still there. I've been in touch with them, but they've not much memorabilia there at the moment. I think the memorabilia from there spread around the country, which I'm still chasing. Billy, like these days, you know, we've got a virus, and he was going abroad, and they had inoculations coming in. So he'd had several inoculations, and it didn't sit well with Billy, and he did become rather ill. And in one of his letters home, he does say, "Can you send me some handkerchiefs? I've got a bit of a runny nose," and that was because of the inoculations and maybe water and the dysentery that was over there. But getting home and leave was a problem. A lot of the lads were going home and not coming back. So you had sergeant majors keeping them on duty till Saturday lunchtime and having them back on duty Monday morning. Of course, with transport not being that brilliant, getting back from Lincolnshire to Salford and then back for parade is pretty difficult. So there was quite a curb on them going home. In one letter, Billy wrote, "I've enclosed a shilling postal order. Please give the children a penny each and get a drink yourself." So she probably sent it, gave it to the kids, and then called into the pub or went round to a sister-in-laws, and they all went out for a beer maybe. The picture you see is Hobson's Choice. If you've ever seen a film, I'm sure you have. Great film, Hobson's Choice. It's just depicting what I thought was what Billy might have been in a situation with Bella when he was having to go back. And you can see he's got a Bible in his hand as well. So again, God-fearing time for a lot of people. They wrote, they seem to write in alternately. So as he received the letter, he sent one back, and things were getting a bit tough at home. And Bella wrote to him, you know, "I think you forgot about me," kind of thing. And he wrote back, and I have this letter as well. And he wrote, "Dear wife," and that's pretty much the way the letters went. "Dear wife, do not again ask such a silly question as, have I forgotten you? As every moment that I am not engaged, my thoughts are always with yourself and our bonny children." And you can imagine what's going on. He's away by this time. He's on a boat down to the Mediterranean, and he makes reference to the American Navy, where he said he wished he would have left the army and joined the American Navy, where he would have got 50 shillings a week and he could look after his family better. So not good times for family liaisons. That's a picture of Whitley Camp, Godalming in Surrey, where he stayed for a short while before being transferred down on the 3rd of July 1915, going down to the south coast to meet that very ship there, the SS Ionic, actually built in Belfast with the White Star Line of Titanic fame, and it was scrapped in 1937. It survived the war, but that's the ship that took Billy from the south coast, past Gibraltar, past Malta, onto Alexandria. They were not allowed off the ship, although they did stop off at those places to pick up supplies. During the journey, Billy wrote several letters. The problem I have with the letters is they're not dated, so I have to look at circumstances and what he's talking about to actually put them in order. So if you can imagine, I've got 100 of them to put in chronological order, which is not easy, but hopefully I'll get there in the end. He wrote, "I write these few lines to let you know that I am in the best of health and spirits." I think that was a general routine, so they didn't want to upset anybody. So we came aboard this ship on Monday last, and we are still journeying on. I've not let you know the name of the ship or the place we are bound for, but we expect calling at some port or other tomorrow. So he's in between the south coast, Plymouth, and Gibraltar there, because he's not actually stopped. So we know when he wrote that letter, that's where we've placed him. And that's a picture of the boat that I've got later on. But when the picture he sent home, which I've got, he actually cut the name of the ship off. And at the bottom there is quite interesting. He wrote a postscript. He said, "P.S. Be careful what you put in your letters, as each one has to be passed by censors. Good night, having a lovely journey." Now, there's some repetition in his letters that I'm noticing, so I'm wondering if it's a code which they used to use, because it used to have to go past a censor, and maybe he wrote down at home, "If I write this, it means this." So I'll try and work something out. I've not been through Bletchley Park, but I'll have a good go at trying deciphering that. Photograph you see is of Z Company, and on the right hand side, on the second row from the front, third in, you can see a short man stood next to a tall guy. Well, that's Billy Unsworth, third one in. That's our Billy. And you can see where the machine guns were coming into it in the front. Whether that was their own or they borrowed them because it was at Grantham, that's what I seem to think. But 23rd of July 1915, they set off again. This time, the destination was Imbross, which is a little island off the west coast of the Gallipoli Peninsula. You can see a list of the ships that escorted the Ionic, a couple of Beagle-class destroyers. Map of Suvla Bay, which Ian showed a similar one earlier on. And the Fusiliers arrived. They were building up on Imbross to hit Suvla Bay, as you can see in the left-hand edge of the land mass. You can see Suvla Bay. That's where they landed on the 6th of August. Billy's brother Albert was with the 11th Manchesters. They were landing at a similar time. The Fusiliers were ordered not to charge their weapons until daylight. Ian touched on the lack of ammunition when he mentioned the gun that only had four rounds and one up the spout, I think you said it. But there was a distinct shortage of ammunition. And they said that if there was firing heard, it would probably be the Australians. So the Australians may not have had the ammunition issue that we did. Billy's CO, Lieutenant Colonel Wellstead, unfortunately, he was wounded during the landing and later died. Major Ibbotson was now in command. And a poem that I came across during my research called The Landing at Suvla Bay sums it up in 4 lines, really. Then came the gallant Manchesters with the Fusiliers by their side, those trusty lads from Lancashire who filled our hearts with pride. So Billy's landed. The picture you see now, a very famous picture of an incident that took place where the Navy guy that was at the back of the ship said, "You'll have to get off." The OC that was on the ship, on the little boat there, the lighter, the little landing craft, he said, "No, it's too deep." Anyway, the officer jumped in with another soldier, and the rope you can see, they secured it to the beach and they jumped in. Some of them went underneath with the kit. And as you can see, confusion, it was rife on the shore. It was dark when they were landing on the 6th of August. And an incident happened that resulted in the 6 Yorks bayonet charging the Manchesters until they suddenly realised they were on the same side. So there was a lot of confusion going on. Similar picture to what Ian showed with the pith helmets. There's a famous song called wrote by a Scotsman about the Australians, and he said they gave him a tin hat, they gave him a gun. Well, I'm afraid there was no tin hats in Gallipoli. They were all pith helmets, and if I'm right, the tin helmets were not issued until a year after on the Western Front. So although it's a great song, just one line of it is a bit incorrect. That's nipping back to Salford as Billy is attacking the beaches and moving inland through Suvla Bay and the Salt Plains. It's a bit of a struggle for his wife. The money wasn't getting home. The pay office at Preston wasn't sending the money to people, and Billy's wife couldn't afford to pay the rent. They were on the doorstep of the local workhouse in Salford, which stood on Eccles New Road, until a neighbour of Bella's informed the landlord of Bella, said, "Look, her husband's missing and there's no money coming home." And so everything was put right, and back they went to their own house. So a close shave, really. And sign of things that was happening at the time that doesn't really get reported. It's all about VCs and bravery, but we kind of look back. Indeed, I'm trying to do in the book, to look back at what happened at home and what was happening in the real world back home. Ian mentioned the 21st of August when he said that it was the kind of the final attack. Let's see if we can do it. It was a mad hot day, and a strange mist came across the hills that morning. And the 21st of August, unfortunately, is the day my fella, Billy Unsworth, was killed just below Scimitar Hill. And it was a strange day because the attack, they wanted the sun to dazzle the Turks, but because of this strange mist, it didn't dazzle them, and they stood out. So it made it a lot more easier for the sharpshooters to take on the British and Australian forces. This is the back of a postcard, which I do have the original. Billy was killed on Scimitar Hill on the 21st of August. A postcard home to his wife said that Billy's body was never found, and a postcard home from a man who knew Billy stated that the Turkish soldiers may have set the wood alight, and we believe that Billy was in fact burnt to death. And I was injured and couldn't do anything about it. What you see is a scanned copy of an original letter written by Billy, so you can see how nice the writing is, how careful it is. And if you scan through, he does start the letter several times, 3 or 4 times. So it takes me back from when I was in the army. I'd start a letter, put it away, and then restart it. But when Billy started the letter, he started it again, "Dear wife." So you can see how he starts different letters on the same piece of paper, which I find quite strange these days, but it sort of tells you how much time he had to write before he had to move on. He wrote as often as he could, and of course I mentioned there's no dates on the letters, and I've got around 100 of them. What you see there is a letter from the OIC Charge Infantry Records that will be up in Preston, as you can see at the top, dated October the 22nd, 1915. Of course, Billy was killed in August, and Bella started trying to get information about her husband. And it was a couple of years before a pension was afforded to Bella. Bella never remarried, and she died in 1965, which is not all that long ago, not for me anyway. It's not that long ago. 1965, she was still around. And she died, never married again. We believe he was promoted to sergeant, and there was a misdemeanor, and we think he was either going to get promoted or he'd been promoted and got bused straight away. So we're still researching on that one. So a bit of a character, our Billy, and as you can see from his family, quite a tough old, confident and nation-loving family. Just to sum up, that's me in the centre there in Gully Ravine. Back in 2015, I went with the Manchester Regiment 1914-18 Living History Group. The chap you can see with the floppy cap, the trench cap, leaning over to my left and your right, I served with him. I served with Ian Johnson. He sort of co-founded and helped with the Living History Group. The chap on the immediate at the front on the right was actually a colonel. He was my colonel for a time, and he's now a very good friend of mine. So in a nutshell and in summary, this story is a work in progress, and although I have gone over quite a bit, I've only touched the surface. Basically, I haven't got much time. So just a thank you to the Gallipoli Association for allowing me to access their archives, and they are supporting me in all the stuff that I do. And thanks to the Manchester Military History Society for letting me talk away this evening. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. That's wonderful.